Hello everybody, my name is Matt. I'm going to be your moderator today, so hopefully you can hear me. If you can, maybe just type hello or something in the chat box. Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to go through a few slides before we start, then I'll hand over to Michael. So just for those of you who haven't used Illuminate before, this is the participant interface. So on the top left you'll see a list of everybody who's in the session. On the left hand side you'll see the chat window, and you can chat to us and to anybody else in the session here. And on the right hand side you'll see the whiteboard window. Okay. If at any point during the session you do have any problems with your audio, then just go to the Tools menu, Audio, and run the Audio Setup Wizard. And that should sort out any problems you're having. At the moment there's no video, because you probably don't want to see me, but when we hand over to Michael, you'll see the video. Just a few things to know about this. You can drag the video around anywhere you want by grabbing the bar at the top. You can resize the video, make it either smaller or larger by using these two buttons. And if by any chance the video looks a bit grey or coarse, just make sure that it's set to fine colour in the quality setting. Okay, so finally, as I said, there's a chat window. You can select to send to everybody in the room or just to the moderator. But please note we are recording this session, and any comments that you write will be recorded. So just before I hand over to Michael, two notices. One, if you have any questions for Michael at any point during the session, then just type them into the chat box and we'll make a note of them, and Michael will answer those towards the end of the session. And two, we are recording this session, and we'll be making the archive available, plus the PowerPoint of the slides in about a week's time from the webinar page. Okay, so at this point there'll just be a quick break as we swap over to Michael. So enjoy the session.
Well, hello everybody. I think I'm live. I hope so. Thank you all for joining the webinar this afternoon, or this morning, or tonight, or whatever it is in your part of the world. It's a really nice opportunity for me to talk to the people who are using our dictionaries, and also to kind of prove that I'm a real person. I think some people think that dictionaries are a bit like the Bible, you know, that they just exist, but actually they are made by real people and fairly normal people, and I'm one of them. So I'm Michael Rundell. I'm the chief editor of all the Macmillan dictionaries. I've been in the dictionary business for about 30 years, and I guess the biggest change in that time is the arrival of computers, the arrival of the internet, and that's been a huge change for all of us in our work lives, in our private lives, and so on. The way it's changed things for dictionaries, I suppose in two big ways. One is the way that we can deliver our dictionaries, so that formerly we just had the option of printing paper books, but now, as well as the books, we can have CD-ROMs and, of course, our online dictionary. So there are lots of different ways now in which we can deliver dictionary content to the people who want to use it. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the other big way in which computers and the web have changed what we do, which is really looking behind the scenes about how we produce dictionaries, because I want to show you how computer technology, language technology, helps us to produce better dictionaries. Well, I'm talking about language technology. What do I mean by that? Well, every time you use Google, you're using language technology. Every time you go to a site that offers automatic translations, you're using language technology, and it's a very big industry. Now, in order for those sites like Google, like the translation sites, in order for them to work well, the machines have to be trained to understand human language. Otherwise they just won't work efficiently at all. And that's quite a difficult job, because it turns out that machines are not very good at understanding language. They're not as good as people. people are much smarter, whatever anyone tells you. People are much smarter than computers. And one of the problems that machines have is that there is a lot of ambiguity in human language. You'll see on the PowerPoint here that I've got the word bank on the screen. Bank has two main meanings. It can be a financial institution, or it can be, you know, like a riverbank, side of the river, that sort of thing. Now, if I'm at home and I say to my wife, well, I'm just going out to the bank, she just says, okay, I'll see you later. What she doesn't say is, well, hold on, could you clarify that, please? Do you mean you're going to the financial institution, or do you mean you're going down to the river? Of course she doesn't. I mean, if communication was like that, it would grind to a halt very quickly. And, you know, life's too short. So it turns out that human beings are very good at understanding from context what meaning is intended. That's much harder for a machine. Machines, computers, all they know is that bank has two meanings, and so in a sentence like I'm going to the bank, it could mean either one of those as far as the computer is concerned. So we have to train these machines so that they make the right decisions. For example, that they make the right translation, because in most other languages that will be two completely different words, like say in Spanish it might be banco and ribera. And I'm sure that's true of all the other languages that you guys speak. So one aspect of language technology is training machines so that they sort of understand language in the way that we do. I'm going to now look quickly at an internet site, so I'll just do this slowly. And the site I'm looking at is, hang on a minute. I've got a little problem here because I don't seem to be getting the sorry, Matt, can people see this one? It didn't appear in the applications. Sorry, we'll sort this out in a moment. When I go to Tools, Applications, Application Sharing, Share Applications, I've only got Illuminate.
Okay, just click on Illuminate.
Oops.
Okay, and now click on it.
Okay, so that should now be there. Okay, sorry about that. I hope you can now see that I've come onto this site called Google Fight. I guess many of you will know Google Fight. It's quite a funny site actually, where you basically set up a fight between two words or two phrases and see which one is the most common. I'm doing a fight here between two spellings of the word separate, because separate is one of those words that people get wrong quite a lot. And we want to know what's the right spelling, with separate or separate. So we'll make a fight and see what Google Fight tells us. And now these two words are fighting. One of them is one. Which one is it? Aha, okay, so it's separate with an A rather than separate with an E, although there are quite a lot of those. And it's telling us that's the right one. Well, and actually, if you go to the Macmillan dictionary online and type in separate with an E, it will actually say to you, do you really mean separate with an A? And then it will take you to that entry in the dictionary. Well, how does this work? What the computer is doing simply is looking at millions of, well, actually billions of words of English.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, I see. You got me there.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Okay.
Is that still okay? Sorry about the technical glitch. It's looking at millions and billions of words of English and just counting, which is something that computers are pretty good at, and it reports and tells us what it finds. Let me give you another example of language technology. Oh, is it not? Okay. Sorry, we're having a problem here. How did it do that then?
Just tell people to do it. Okay, there you go. Okay.
That should be right, yeah. Does that mean that no one saw the last one? Or?
No, redo the last one.
Okay, I'm going to redo this. I think you didn't see it. Looking at the difference between the word I hope you can see this now. Maybe one or two. Ah, now it's okay. I see I've got somebody from Brazil. And, oh, lots of people. Good. Okay, this is very simple. Google Fight, I think, is a site that a lot of people will know. You can set up a fight between two words, two phrases, and so on. And I did one between separate, spelled with an E in the middle, and separate, spelled with an A in the middle. I'll just redo the fight because it's kind of fun. So they're fighting each other now. One of them's won, and the winner is separate with an A. And the system does this by simply trawling through billions of words of English on the internet and seeing which is most common. It's kind of quite bad that there are so many misspellings, but at least we can see pretty clearly which is the winner here. Let me show you another example of language technology. This is a site called, again from Google, it's called Google Books Ngram Viewer, which works by looking at all the books that have been recorded in Google Books, which is again billions and billions of words of English, and indeed other languages. And all the way back to the year 1800 up to the year 2000. Now they've got a little graph here that's comparing two expressions, Atlantis and El Dorado. I'm going to put something, hang on, I'm going to put something new in. I'm going to put in two words. One is disabled and one is crippled. Now you probably know that if someone has a physical disability, like one of their legs doesn't work normally or something, we describe them as disabled. We say they have a disability. But 30, 40 years ago, maybe, people often use the word crippled. Now that would now be regarded as very inappropriate, rather offensive, and it's not used anymore. But if we put those two words in here and then press the button that says search lots of books, pretty quickly we'll get, well, not quickly enough, but here, oh, what's this? Google Books is having trouble finding that page, for heaven's sake. I'll try it once more. Anyway, this time it worked. The blue line is disabled, the red line is crippled, and you can see pretty clearly that in about 1960, in about 1960 the lines cross, disabled becomes much, much more common, and crippled begins to die off. So that's just a couple of examples, Google Fight and Google Ngram Viewer, showing you how language technology works. So I'm now going to go back to my PowerPoint, I hope. Try again. Yeah, should do. It's not returning to the PowerPoint at the moment, so I'm not quite sure what the problem with that is. Sorry, we're having a few technical problems today. Tools, application sharing, host applications. Should have gone. The host applications is unticked now. Yep. But the PowerPoint. There you go. Oh, okay. Thanks a lot. Sorry about all this. You know, these things normally work except when you're doing it live. Okay, so we've looked at a couple of examples of language technology. But the really important point to make about this is that this is kind of scientific, because basically we're looking at lots of data, we're looking at lots of examples of people using language in real communicative situations, whether it's in newspapers, in conversations, and novels, and so on. They're just using language normally, and we're able to observe it. And that's basically how we make dictionaries. Here we are. We've got two different ways of finding out about words. One is introspection, and one is observation. Introspection is, if you like, the old way. Introspection just means, you know, you examine what you know about a word yourself. You examine your own memory, your own mental lexicon, we'd say. And, you know quite a lot about how words work in your own language. But Observation is a much more reliable and much more thorough and much more scientific approach to doing that. So effectively observing language, and you can see that the Google Flights, Google Ngrams were based on that. That's what we do when we produce our dictionaries. And it sort of works like this. We've got on the left-hand side, you see those two pictures, we've got language as a whole, language in use, spoken language, written language, and now all sorts of things in between, like tweets and chat rooms and so on. Now, observing language as a whole is a big job. There's too much of it. It goes on all over the place. Big languages like English and Spanish and Arabic are used very widely and in different ways in all parts of the world. So we can't observe it all. So what we do is we make a sample. I mean, exactly the same way as when people are doing things like doing opinion polls or market research. You make a representative sample, and that's what you observe. And then, so that's in the middle. The sample is what we call a corpus. I expect many of you know about corpora, the plural of corpus. The corpus is a sample of the language as a whole. We examine that, and on the basis of that, we produce the dictionary, which is a kind of distillation of what you find in the corpus. So how does that work? Let's have a look at a slide. Now, this is, I think it would be better for me to do this live. I'll go now, again, let's hope this works, to one of our applications. Whoops, share application. Okay, Firefox. I'm going to a website which is where we keep our corpus. It's called the Sketch Engine. And I've typed in the word remember. I'm going to look at how the word remember is used. I click a button that says make concordance, and very quickly up it comes. This is what we call a concordance. Well, what is that? That is what the computer has done. It's gone into the corpus, which is about 1.6 billion words of English from all sorts of different sources. And it's looked for every time the word remember has been used, and it sticks them all on the computer screen with their surrounding context. And if you look at this little number up in the top left-hand corner, if you can read that, it says hits, and that means how many examples have we got in our corpus of the word remember? And we have, in fact, 251,659. It's kind of a lot. Now, what can we do? What can we find out by looking at that? Here's one. This is worth remembering. That's what somebody like Michael Lewis might call a chunk. It's a very common, recurrent pattern in English. We've got here remember that. Remember is often used with a that clause, isn't it? Please remember that URLs are case sensitive. So is telling us remember is. Oh, here's one further up, the second one. I don't remember seeing Santa come. So remember followed by a gerund, a verb in the ing form also. And there's another one down here. I don't remember wearing a suit at all. Well, I don't know what he was wearing. And there are things like adverbs. They barely remembered. You see that? Another one down here. He vaguely remembered. Well, this is all good, but there's an awful lot of it. As you see, there are 250,000 examples and something like 12,500 pages like this one, and you would go completely mad if you tried to analyze all those one by one. Fortunately, we have some very clever software which kind of comes to the rescue. We have something called a word sketch. Well, I'm going to show you how that works. Remember is a verb, not a noun. And we say word sketch. So this is all happening live. The computer is, my computer here in Oxford is going off to the server for this software. The server, I happen to know, is in Texas in the United States, and then it's coming back and telling me all about the word remember. And this word sketch is a bit different from the concordance, the last thing I showed you, because it's actually a kind of one-page summary of how the word works. You see, it's got up here a thing that says constructions. That's like grammatical patterns, syntax patterns. For example, remember followed by a that clause, remember followed by an in clause. This one at the bottom, remember followed by a noun and then an in clause. That's like, I remember her telling me not to do that, and so on. So it's telling you, it's giving you loads of information about all the constructions. Which ones are the most common? Remember, with a that clause is much more common than all of the others. And we can look down and see things like, well, here's a good column, adverbs that go with remember. Fondly remember, vividly remember, vaguely remember, distinctly remember, and so on. So, and we can even look more finely than that at things like prepositional. This whole page is just remember with prepositions. Here you see, you've got this one that says remember with a noun. You can say, you know, I remember her with great fondness. I remember my old teacher with fondness, with affection, with gratitude, with mostly very positive things. Sadness, but also admiration, amusement, pleasure, delight, and so on. This is telling us an enormous amount about how the word remember is used. So let me now flip back to my, I hope this works this time. Hooray, okay, so we're now back in the PowerPoint. So these are just screenshots which will be there in the PowerPoint. You remember Matt was saying that he will post all this in about a week, so you'll be able to see that. That's, remember, oh, that's one a bit larger, easier to see, and this is the word sketch that I just showed you. Well, all of this information, it feeds into our dictionaries. We get information about the most important grammar patterns, the most important collocations. We also get example sentences from the corpus as well. So that's really the basis of how we do it. And as we said at the beginning, it's observation rather than introspection. So it's much more scientific. And as you can see, there's a huge amount of detail. And if you look up the entry for remember in the Macmillan Dictionary, you'll see that all of the really important information that we found in the computer software is then distilled into the dictionary entry for the word, and that's basically what we do. Well, so you might then ask, well, how do you know what's most important? How do you know, what? I see somebody's put in a comment saying, amazing. Well, that's nice. I'm glad they're amazed by our software. It is pretty amazing too. This latest thing, the word sketch that you see here now, is a relatively new piece of software. It's about 5 or 6 years old, and it really has revolutionized our lives. Well, so the question is, how do we know what's most important? I guess the simple answer is, it's a lot to do with frequency. What is most common? There's general agreement in the language teaching community that the more frequent a word is, the more frequent a grammar pattern is, the more frequent a collocation is, then the more worth learning it is. It's a pretty simple idea. I mean, there's an awful lot of vocabulary in English, as there is in any other language. Most of it you don't need, and learning it all would be impossible and pointless. So it makes sense to be able to focus, to prioritize, to say, well, this is what I really need to learn, and what I need to spend my time focusing on, and to prioritize. And frequency is really the key thing here. No, we've had that. Think of it like this. Look at this slide here. What's more worth learning? An expression like small improvement or a minuscule amelioration. Well, they both mean the same thing, that, minuscule is a pretty rare word, amelioration is an even more rare word. And really, with words like that, you don't need to learn them. You just need to look them up in the dictionary when you come across them. and then probably forget about them because you may never see them again in the rest of your life. But a word like small and a word like improvement, those are worth learning because you're going to come up against them again and again because they are so frequent. Computers are very helpful here because they are extremely good at counting. They don't make mistakes. They don't get tired, and they do a good job. They provide lots of information for us about what's frequent and what isn't, and they can tell us exactly how frequent amelioration is in comparison with improvement. And I can tell you it's probably about 1/1,000,000th as common. So this is one of the very big benefits of language technology. And one of the things that we've learned from this, which is really interesting and really important, is that it's a fact about language, actually, and not just about English, but about languages in general. And it's two things, that in every language there's a small number of very frequent words and a large number of very infrequent words. This is just a fact about language. English has well over 1,000,000 words, but actually the ones that people, even native speakers know and recognize are perhaps only about 40,000. The ones you use actively are much smaller than that. It's much fewer than that. Most of the time we get by with 5 or 10,000 common words, and those are the ones to focus on. And to show you how that works, there's a little graph here which is called uneven distribution of words. Words are not distributed equally in the language. The word the, just the word the on its own, makes up about 6 or 7% of all English text. So that's really worth learning, because once you've learned the word the, then you're reading something or listening to something, and you already understand about 7% of the words, which is pretty handy. The 100 most frequent words, that's interesting, make up even more, about 42%, and then it goes up. The 3,000 most frequent words cover about 80% of all text, and the 7,500 make up over 90% of text, something like 92, 93. So this gives us, we talk about coverage, which means by learning quite a small number of words, you actually understand and know quite a large amount of text. So as I said, the 7,500 most common words make up about 92, 93% of most text. After that, we get what we call diminishing returns. That's to say that the more additional words you learn, you don't actually get a big advantage. You can learn another 20,000 words, but perhaps it only gets you up to 96% coverage. But what does that really mean? Well, I'll try and explain a little bit more what we mean by that. Look at this first sentence here. To be or not to be, that is the question. Well, that's probably the most famous sentence in English. And actually, all the words there, except for question, are in the top 100 most common words in English. Actually, they're all in probably the top 50. To be or not to be, that is the. And then you've got the word question, which is a bit less common, but it's still, what have I got here? The 243rd most common word in English. So if you just learn the 250 most common words in English, then you'd already be able to understand this quotation, although of course understanding it is perhaps there are different ways of understanding it, but at least you would know all the words. But I've done so actually in that sentence, which is 10 words, 90% of the words in that sentence are in the 100 most frequent words in English, and 100% of the words are in the top 250. But I've got here a longer piece while we're on the theme of Shakespeare, just to show a little bit more how this works. And the question here for you is, which words in this passage would you say are outside of the top 7,500 words in English? In other words, we see the 7,500 words as a kind of core vocabulary for an upper intermediate or advanced learner. And the question is, if you know there's 7,500 words, how much of this would you be able to understand? I'll read it out. Now, when you're identifying any words which are not in the top 7,500, don't worry about words like Shakespeare and Elizabeth and things like that. Those are proper nouns, so they don't count. But let me just read this out. As the Royal, I just got this out of the paper on Saturday, quite random. As the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford opens again after a major facelift, Gillian Darley uncovers the story of its pioneering architect Elizabeth Scott, who paved the way for other women to join the profession. In January 1928, Elizabeth Scott won the international competition to design the new Shakespeare Memorial Theatre. The only woman in a field of more than 70, she was still too young to vote. Yet 3 eminent architects had picked her to design one of England's most prestigious public buildings. The press went mad. Girl architect beats men, unknown girls leap to fame, and much more in a similar vein. One journalist wrote that okay, well then we run out of space there, so that's where the passage ends. So, so somebody's got here, Francoise has said, facelift, paved, pioneering, design eminent, prestigious, vain. Okay, those are very good guesses. Gosh, that is good. Let me show you. Not vain, not design, but all of these other ones that you mentioned. Facelift, yeah, that's not in the top 7,500. Nor is pioneer, and nor is paved. Really, it's paved the way, isn't it? That's a phrase. And then we've got the eminent architect and the prestigious public buildings. But everything else in that passage is in the top 7,500 words. I hope that kind of clarifies this point I made earlier about coverage, that with quite low numbers you get high coverage. So in this case, if you know the 7,500 most frequent words, you get a coverage on average of 92 to 93% of any text, a novel, a newspaper, and so on. The only real exception would be something that was very, very technical. Just to go back there, you see down at the bottom I've got here 5 words out of 109. So that statistic holds up quite well. 5 words out of 109 would be unknown to you if you only knew the top 7,500. And just to make this interesting point at the end, most of the words in a language are rare. That's to say, if we say there are 1 million or so words in English, nearly all of them are really rare. But most of the words in a text are common. It's an interesting kind of conundrum, but it does help you to understand why knowing about frequency and knowing how to prioritize learning is so important. There's kind of another interesting way of looking at this, which helps to explain it, where we can make a distinction between what we call core vocabulary and sublanguage vocabulary. Now, core vocabulary, that's kind of obvious. That's this large number, well, fairly large number, 7,000, 8,000 very, very common words. Now, those are the sort of words that you can use in any kind of communication. Words like remember, words like design. It doesn't matter whether you're having a conversation, whether you're writing a PhD thesis, or whether you're sending somebody a tweet. These common words, the 7,500 top words, are the words that you need. But then you have sublanguages. There are hundreds and hundreds of sublanguages, which is, in other words, specific terms that are known to and used by people in a particular community. By which I mean, you know, whether they may be beekeepers, they may be sports people, they may be nuclear physicists. They all have their own sublanguage and their own terms which fall outside of the core vocabulary. And there's one other important point here is that words also have core meanings and sublanguage meanings. And I've given the example here of the word culture, because culture has a sort of general core meaning, you know, culture, the arts, and so on. But it also has a sub-language meaning. It's used by biologists, isn't it? They talk about making a culture, and that's rather a specific meaning. So, and think of our community. We are basically in the linguistics and language teaching community, and we have sub-language words like this. Collocation. We all talk about collocation the whole time, but if you go out into the street and ask, someone who isn't in this community, someone who isn't involved in language teaching or linguistics, they won't know what you're talking about, and it doesn't matter how educated they are, they just won't know that. We also have sub-language meanings, the point I made that there are, so we talk about drills, about aspects. Verbs have aspects and mood. We talk about aspiration when we're talking about pronunciation. We talk about chunks. Those again are very specific meanings. They're sub-language meanings of those words, which are actually common words. A word like aspect is extremely common. And so I've got here a little quote from a Noam Chomsky book, completely incomprehensible as usual for Chomsky, where he says, in each terminal string, 0 or more noun phrases are assigned to the marker of the element WH. Well, actually, all of those words are quite straightforward. Terminal, 0, phrase, marker, element. But, of course, the combination of them, because they are used in, they are sub-language terms in very high-level theoretical linguistics, and consequently, most people, including me, don't really understand what he's talking about. But that's just to indicate the idea of core and sub-language, and it's core languages, core words, core meanings that we focus on in our dictionaries. A little bit of a research background here about vocabulary size. Essentially, how many words do you really need to know? How many words do you need to learn? This relationship, which we've already talked about, between coverage and comprehension, that if you know a certain percentage of words in a passage that you're reading, then you will be able to comprehend it. So what is the right number? Vocabulary size is the best predictor of success in reading and actually also general competence in a language. So the question is, what is the optimum ratio of known and unknown words in a text? That's kind of a stupid question, actually, because the optimum ratio is obviously 1 to 1. You would want to know all the words in the text, but that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen to me either. But there's one of the people who's done a lot of work about vocabulary size is Paul Nation, ISP Nation, and there's a fairly recent paper of his from the Canadian Modern Language Review, where he's looked at how much of a passage do you need to know? How many of the words in a passage do you need to know in order to be able to understand it? And he's saying that if you're reading, let's say, a serious newspaper, if you have a vocabulary of about 8,000 words, that will give you 97 to 98% coverage, and that's good enough, because if you understand 97, 98% of the words in the passage, you will almost certainly be able to guess any of the words that you don't know, because there's so few. He looked at the same thing with novels and found that the number was a wee bit higher, about 9,000 words. So that's one piece of research. Another person who's big in this field is Norbert Slit, who works at Nottingham University. And this is a kind of review article that he did a couple of years ago in Language Teaching Research, where he looked at all of the recent research in this area of vocabulary size. And he says, the research shows that the coverage required for comprehension estimates range between 95 and 98%, and as he says, learners need large vocabularies to successfully use a second language. So high vocabulary targets need to be set and pursued. But what do we mean by high? Well, roughly speaking, we mean, sorry, I've slightly lost my place here. A third point, I should say, is it's not just about comprehension. I mean, the two studies I looked at, Paul Nation and Norbert Slit, were talking about comprehension. In other words, how many words do you need to know in order to understand what you're reading or what you're listening to. But this also relates, of course, to language production, when you're writing, speaking. And here's another quotation from a couple of people who we've worked with at Macmillan, Sylvie de Coq and Sylviane Granger from the University of Louvain in Belgium. And they say a number of studies reveal that learners from a wide variety of mother tongue backgrounds display a common tendency to overuse common non-specific words such as important or big or nice. And I'm sure if you're teaching English, you'd be very, very familiar with that. That students will keep on recycling and relying on the same very common words rather than having a more sophisticated and wide-ranging vocabulary to draw on. And sometimes these are called lexical teddy bears because you kind of hang on to them for comfort. But if you don't have, if your lexical resources, if your vocabulary is not big enough, then that means that the level of fluency that you're getting is rather low. Well, what should we do? What can we do in dictionaries about this on the basis of all this research? What we do is we focus on core vocabulary. If you look in the Macmillan Dictionary, you will find that the fullest treatment goes to words, the really common words, the really frequent meanings, collocations, and phrases. So we do include words like ameliorate, which we talked about earlier, but we just give them a definition and that's it. That's really all you need to know about a word like that. You don't need to use it actively. It's much too rare. You will sometimes need to know what it means, but that's about it. But what we do is for the frequent words, we give them a lot of detail, about how they work grammatically and how they combine with other words, which all goes back to, of course, the computer software that I was showing you earlier, which provides all that information for us. The other thing that we do is we have explicit indicators of frequency, and if you look in the Macmillan Dictionary, what you'll find is that the really common words are shown in red, the top 7,500 words, and we have stars to show which ones are most common. I'll just show you that now. Hold on. We'll go into the dictionary. Here we are. Here's our online dictionary. So, okay, well, we'll stick with the word remember. Search that. I'm sure everybody knows this site. And here we are. Here's the word remember. So we can look at this. Remember, the big word. There's lots of stuff going on here, and you'll recognize some of the things like these collocations that we looked at before in the computer software. Let's do show less, and that enables you to get a kind of outline of the entry. But the important thing I wanted to show you was that remember is shown in red rather than in black, and it has 3 stars. 3 stars means it is one of the most common words in English. If it's 3 stars, it means it's one of the top 2,500 most common words. 2 stars means it's outside the top 2,500, but less than within 5,000 most common. And then 1 star word means it's somewhere in the band between 5,000 and 7,500 most common. And actually, there's a little thing here saying what are red words, which explains all that. But if we look at another word that actually means more or less the same thing, recollect. I don't recollect hearing that before. It means the same as remember, but you can see it's shown in black because that's telling you it's outside of this core vocabulary, not part of the 7,500 most common words. It still has a definition and it still has an example and a pronunciation and a little bit of grammar saying it's transitive and intransitive and all of that stuff, but it doesn't have the same level of detail. So let's see if we can now get back to the PowerPoint. Hooray, here we are. Indicators of frequency. So that's what we do in Macmillan. We say the top 7,500 words shown in red with these 3 frequency bands. All of the other learners' dictionaries, the Oxford Dictionary, the Longman Dictionary, the Coble Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Learners' Dictionary, do something different. They focus on 3,000 words. For some reason, this is the number that they have decided is the core vocabulary. I mean, Oxford has a thing called the Oxford 3000. Longman puts the top 3,000 words in blue, and so on. Now, I would argue that that's not enough. I mean, it actually says here in the Longman Dictionary, by knowing this list, 3,000 words, a learner of English is in a position to understand 86% or more of what he or she reads. I'm a bit skeptical of that figure because our figures would say it's more like 83%. But that really isn't enough, I don't think. 86%, well, that means there are 14% that you don't understand, or probably more like 15 or 60%. So one word in every 7, one word in every 6, you don't know, and that's an awful lot of unknown words. And if you say, well, we have a core vocabulary of 3,000 words, well, what kind of words are you not getting in that list? I've got here just a few, small number of words that are in the frequency range, 3,500 to 6,000 most common words in English. And they're words like abnormal, admiration, ambitious, bargain, bias, charming, compromise, complexity, comparable, corrupt, and of course many more, because the difference between 3,000 and 7,500 is, of course, 4,500, and that's an awful lot of words. So my conclusion there is that 3,000 words is not an appropriate target for people at upper intermediate and advanced level to focus on, and we believe, and I think the research proves, that 7,500 is a much more appropriate target. The same article by Norbert Slit. I'm just seeing here what time it is. I don't want to bore you for too long, but I'll go on a little bit longer. The same article stresses the need to, what he says, recognize the richness and scope of the lexical knowledge that needs to be mastered. And what he really means is it's not just knowing a word, because it's not just knowing this word, it's knowing about the word. Because what do we really mean when we say that you know a word? It's lots of things. It's about context. This is all about knowing a word. The formal features. You have to know what it's spelled, how it's spelled, the morphology, you know what the past tense is, and so on, how you pronounce it. So those are some features. And then there's the meanings, the semantic features. How many meanings does it have? It will have what we call denotative meanings and connotative meanings. An example of that is, we looked at the word facelift earlier, about this theatre getting a facelift. Well, that's not a literal meaning, that's a kind of metaphorical or figurative meaning, isn't it? The denotative meaning of facelift is literally a kind of an operation or a bit of cosmetic surgery. And then the figurative meaning is, you know, you give your website a facelift, give the theatre a facelift, and so on. And words have cultural meanings and so on. And then there are all the contextual features, and that's what's really important, actually, is it's no good just knowing what a word means. You've got to know how to use it. You've got to know about its syntax, its collocation, the chunks that it appears in, and so on. And then finally, there's the socio-linguistic aspects, by which I mean things like register. Is this a formal word, an informal word? Would you use it in a conversation? Would you use it in a piece of serious academic writing, and so on? Is it offensive? Remember the word disabled and crippled that we talked about earlier. So these are all facts about words that you need to know. So it's not really enough just to say, well, I know this word. It's sort of important to know about context. Context is the most important thing. That's actually how human beings know the difference. You know, when a word has 2 or 3 different meanings and somebody uses it to you, how do you know what they mean? It's context. I'll give you an example about the word treat. If I say to you, well, what does treat mean? well, what does it mean? Actually, it doesn't mean anything until you add context. First of all, you need to know, well, are we talking about the noun or are we talking about the verb? English has got that funny morphology where nouns and verbs can have the same word form. So let's have a look at some verb uses. So here's the first one. The doctor treated my mother with penicillin. Okay, so that's obviously giving medical treatment to make somebody better. The next one is we treated the floorboards with preservative. Well, it's kind of the same pattern. You're treating something with a chemical. But in this case, it's not a person. It's a piece of furniture or something like that. It's not really the same because you're not trying to make the floorboards better. They're not sick. You're trying to prevent them from falling apart or something like that. What about the third one, though? The doctor treated my mother with great kindness. Now, that's almost the same pattern as the first sentence, but clearly it's a different meaning. Well, it is to us. For a computer, that's quite problematic. They look at the pattern and say, oh, well, you know, you could either treat people with penicillin or with great kindness, but of course they mean something else. And then the last one, the doctor treated my mother to an expensive dinner in a posh restaurant. Well, clearly that's a completely different meaning again, and it's the context that tells us what things mean. In the last case, there's a particular grammatical pattern that you treat somebody to something rather than with something, and it just means something different. You change the to with, and you change the meaning. So the point I'm making is that without context, actually treat doesn't mean anything. And the more common a word is, the more meanings it has. In a way, the less it means anything at all until you know what the context is. And a very big part of the context, I'm coming on to my sort of final bit now, a very big part of the context is collocation. Why is collocation so important? Clearly, it's very important in productive mode. It's important when you're writing, when you're speaking, because it's a kind of key to naturalness. Corpus frequency, meaning the fact that two words are very often found together, that means that this is a typical combination, and because it's frequent and typical, it is also natural. So it's, for fluency, collocation is terribly important. But it is also important in receptive mode as well, if you're trying to understand what someone's saying. There's the famous old quotation from J.R. Firth that you know a word by the company it keeps. And that's really true, and I'll show that to you here. The word sick in English, it has quite a lot of different meanings. And the only way you know which meaning is intended is actually, in this case, it's through the collocations. So you've got these three sentences. I'd never eaten oysters before. I became violently sick. We know that means that you vomited, because violently, when sick has the collocation violently, that's what it means. The next one says, volunteers are trained to provide care for chronically sick people in their homes. Now, the chronically sick people are not throwing up the whole time. They're not vomiting. They are ill. They have a chronic illness. And the word chronically, as a collocation of sick, tells us what the meaning is. And the last one, we are all heartily sick of their negative attitude. So there are two clues there. There's the word of, sick of something, fed up with it, but heartily again. And you can't interchange these. You wouldn't say, I hadn't eaten oysters before and I became heartily sick. That wouldn't make any sense. So collocation is not only about fluency, not only about language production, but it's also very important for understanding. I'm just going to say something very briefly about collocations dictionary, because we've just quite recently produced Macmillan collocations dictionary, which was published about 3 or 4 months ago. And how do you do that? Well, as far as the language data goes, that's not a problem. We've already seen that, and I'll just show you once more how we do that by going to web application. I'll show you our corpus software once again. We'll do one more. I'm going to do the word crime. That's a nice word with lots of good collocations. Show the word sketch. So the computer's searching through our 1.6 billion word corpus and telling us which are the common collocations of crime. So it's very easy for us. We've got what are these words that go with crime? Commit crime, tackle crime, combat crime, organized crime, reduce crime, and fight crime, and so on. You get crime used as a modifier, things like crime prevention, crime scene, crime syndicate. And then you will also get adjectives: violent crime, heinous crime, petty crime, serious crime, and so on. So no problem with the language technology. That gives us a huge amount of information that we can put into a collocations dictionary. But which words do we include? Well, what we're looking for is combinations that perform a kind of clear semantic function. Things like, if I'm talking about crime, how do I say to do a crime, to make a crime? Well, we don't say either of those. We usually say commit, perpetrate. That's a collocation. If I'm talking about, if I want to say something's cold, but I want to add a bit of emphasis and say, well, it's very cold, well, I can say it's very cold. That's not a problem. That makes sense. But it's not so interesting. If I want to be really emphatic, I might want to say it's bitterly cold. So we're looking at these kind of semantic functions that of the kind that you want to perform and providing information for that. There's also a big focus in the collocations dictionary on academic and professional context. And we include most of the words that are in the academic word list in words like analogy and assume and assertion and so on. I'm going to I'll go over this quite quickly because I think I've been talking long enough and you're probably a bit fed up with me right now. But we divide entries into, we look at grammatical relations like this one, verbs that go with nouns. That's like commit with crime. So if you have the word analysis, if that's the word you're interested in, what do you do with an analysis? You can conduct an analysis, carry out an analysis, present an analysis, and so on. If you want to describe an analysis with an adjective, you get words like thorough, in-depth, and so on, and lots of other things too. The other, we'll go over that. And then the secondary division is into semantic sets, because if you get a word like advice, and you have this relationship where there are verbs that go with advice, you can actually divide them up into different sets for like words that mean giving advice, words that mean asking for advice. Giving advice is words like issue advice, offer advice, give advice, provide advice, and then words that mean follow advice and just like I took his advice and so on. Each of those sets has its own definition, and I'll just show you what that looks like. This is not a terribly good slide, but it will be up on the whole PowerPoint thing will be up on the archive page in a week or so. But just to give you an idea, we've got the word implication here. It's adjectives with nouns. So you get things like, when you want to say it's an important implication, you can use words like enormous, profound, significant. This will have significant implications, and there's an example as well. If the implications are kind of bad or negative, you can say things like, this will have devastating implications for the whole population of the region, and so on. And there are lots of other, these are all divided up, you know, broad-ranging, far-reaching, wide-ranging implications. So it's very cleverly sort of designed to be as straightforward as possible to find the meaning that you want to express. Just one more, this is very useful in professional context. Budgets, we're always interested in budgets, and even if we're not interested in them, we have to deal with them. So you get verbs that go with budget, things like decide on and manage a budget. So you have things like set a budget, propose a budget, manage a budget. And then you get things like this one, which is something we do quite often when we're producing dictionaries, which is we spend more of the budget than we're supposed to. So you exceed your budget, you go over your budget, you run over your budget. And if you're manage things very badly, you blow your budget, which is what none of us want to do. So that's just to give you an idea of how the collocations dictionary works. But really it's coming back to what I said earlier, that the language technology, in this case, it's corpus-based, it's oriented towards language production, very easy access, as you see, that collocates are grouped, first of all according to grammar, and then secondly according to meaning. And Sam MacArthur, who I think might have done one of these webinars, and has certainly written books to Macmillan about ready for IELTS and so on, he described it as being tailor-made for IELTS, which we were all rather pleased about. So this is my last slide, just to say, well, first of all, thank you all very much for listening in. I hope you've learned a bit about language technology and how that affects our dictionaries. The big things are we have a lot more language data. There's just so much about now that we hardly know where to turn. We have very, very large corpora. There are also additional resources like Twitter feeds and so on, which tell us how language is going now. Of course, skilled analysis. We're a skilled lot of lexicographers who use all this data and software to produce the dictionaries. And the thing that we're doing now as well, which is really nice, is involving you, the user. We involve you in sessions like this, in social networking. You know, there's a big thing going on in our social networking about what's your favorite word. And we also have this thing called the Open Dictionary, and if you haven't had a look at that, please do. It's on our website. That's where you can, you know, if you found a new word or heard a new word, you can stick if you see that it's not in the dictionary, you can make an entry for it and send it to us, and it will appear in the Open Dictionary. And that's really grown, and it's now, there's about 600 or 700 words in there, so it's moving up. So this is my last slide, which says, and lots of you are saying thank you a lot, which is very nice of you. But it's for me to say thank you because I've really enjoyed it. It's been a nice opportunity to you know, talk to everyone out there, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. So thanks a lot, and I think at this point I hand back to Matt, who's the moderator. What do I do now? Do I turn off my... I think he's coming through. So, yeah. Okay, what do I do? Well, I said goodbye, so goodbye again.